So I'm Joe Gunden from the University of Michigan, and this summer my project took place in Morocco at Ibn Rushd Oncology Center in Casablanca, and today I'll be presenting on evaluating the incidence of inflammatory breast cancer in Casablanca, Morocco. So Taylor kind of touched on a few of these things in her presentation earlier, but just a little introduction on breast cancer in general. It's a large concern worldwide and is the most common cancer in women. And we generally tend to see higher incidence in high-income countries. However, in low and middle-income countries, we see about half the cases and around 60% of the mortality. So there's also disparity in the survival rates seen in different areas of the world. So in high-income areas such as North America, we typically see survival rates at 80% or higher, and middle-income countries around 60%, and in some low-income countries we see survival rates at 40% or lower. And a little bit about inflammatory breast cancer, or IBC in particular. It's a rare and severe form of breast cancer, and it's usually characterized by a rapid onset of the symptoms. The main three symptoms being the redness, swelling, and peau d'orange of the breast. And it's primarily diagnosed based on these clinical characteristics. So histopathology can't provide a sure diagnosis of the disease. So that makes it difficult to diagnose, and also difficult to distinguish between other types of locally advanced breast cancer, or LABC. And then also in North Africa in particular, based on previous studies, we've seen a higher proportion of IBC compared to all types of breast cancers. So in North Africa, it's around 6 to 10% based on these studies. And in the U.S., it's closer to 1 to 2% of all breast cancers. So this fact was one of the main motivations in the beginning of my study as to why I wanted to look at IBC in Morocco. So methods, as I said before, my primary source of data was the Cancer Registry of Grand Casablanca region. And it's through the Leila Salma Foundation, which is, Leila Salma is the wife of the King of Morocco, and has this foundation that has done a lot of work in the country on cancer prevention and treatment. And the Cancer Registry is for the city of Casablanca and the surrounding region, and covers 4 million inhabitants of the city and surrounding region. And it's a population-based registry. So my study was a secondary analysis of registry, which I mentioned, medical records and logbooks at the Ibn Rushd Oncology Center, and also a case control study conducted by Dr. Solomon and others at Ibn Rushd. So I took the patient ID number from the registry, which was uniquely created by their CanReg software, and linked it to a dossier or case number on an Excel spreadsheet, and then gave these numbers to the people working in the medical record room. This is by far the most organized portion of the medical record room here. And yeah, the system for getting our medical records was kind of a frustrating process, having to wait for these people to find the medical records because they didn't want us going through all of their medical records ourselves. So this is a picture of the cancer center there. A definite strength was the students and staff that were there, and also Dr. Karima, who was the head of the registry, just always available to answer questions and help us translate things from the medical records from French, and yeah, anything we needed. Another strength was the size of the data sets. I was able to find somewhere around 70 IBC cases, and in the registry there were around 4,800 total breast cancer cases for a 5-year period. It's also the largest cancer center in Casablanca, so that was definitely a strength, large source of data. A limitation was, as I mentioned, the system for obtaining medical records was definitely a strain on my project, having to wait around for my data. Missing and incomplete data was a limitation as well. About a third of the medical records from the registry that were IBC cases were missing or in a different department or not available. And also the amount of information in each record that I needed to record was variable. Some I would have like one page with hardly any information, the next record would be a ton of information to record, so it's just difficult to get those two things into one data set. So as far as initial results, from the registry data, this is just on all breast cancers, crude incidence of 24.1 per 100,000. And in the registry I found 43 cases coded T4D, which indicates IBC. So around 71% of the cases had SEER or TNM staging available. And yeah, I want to do more analysis of that in the future. And then I compiled the data set of all the IBC cases from the 3 different sources and recorded the variables: age, height, and weight, clinical information, so like the redness, swelling, and peau d'orange, treatment information, tumor grade and size, receptor information, and other variables. And I also have created a table of cases from the registry to the logbooks, medical records, and the case control study. It's just an example of one of the sheets of my IBC data set. And I have it color coded for the different TNM classifications. This is my table of IBC cases for the different years from the logbook IBC study registry, and then I eliminated the duplicates and then have a total. As you can see, I don't have any IBC cases from 2008, so I'm eliminating that year from my analysis of IBC. And then I'm kind of like trying to decide if I can say, so like there's only one case from 2014, 2015 from the logbook, and 10 from 2013, so obviously there's some missing data there from 2014 and 15. I'm still in the process of deciding which year I can use as representative of the number of IBC cases that I can count. So my future analysis, I want to do more analysis of the staging information for all breast cancers, see if there's any significant differences between patients that have staging information available and not. And I kind of stopped cleaning the TNM variable after I eliminated the missingness and started doing more stuff with medical records, but I want to continue to do that. And yeah, just deciding what information from the medical records I can analyze and which variables I have enough complete data for. And then, based on the table that I showed earlier, I wanted to calculate a corrected incidence of IBC. And the reason I can do that is because Ibn Rushd accounts for 50% of the cases, around 50% of the cases in the registry. So that allows me to do that. Lastly, and I don't know if this is something that's possible still or not, but in the registry, there's less than 10% of cases with specific address or neighborhood of residence. So I can't really do anything with geographic mapping using that. However, in the medical records, most times they'll have their national ID card with an address. So that's, and they mentioned that that information might be available electronically. So that's something I might want to do as well. As far as my learning experience, just conducting my own research project for the first time was a great learning experience. Obviously, I had to deal with incomplete data and medical records. And just working with people at the registry was a great experience, and figuring out the right questions to ask while having somewhat of a language barrier was a good experience. Lots of people have already mentioned having to be patient. That was definitely the case for me, waiting for the medical records. And also just the Moroccan experience, figuring out housing, and figuring out how to get around in Casablanca. That was fun, but good. And then Dr. Ibrahim's dissertation defense was, I thought, a pretty unique experience. He was a PhD student that was working in our office, and we got to go to his dissertation and hear him present his work. I just thought that was pretty unique. And ideas for future students, definitely to utilize data from more recent years. Currently they're working on the registry data for 2013 through 16. And geographic mapping, if that information becomes available in the future. Also looking at the reliability of medical records. In diagnosing IBC, I know there's been studies conducted in Egypt on that, so that'd also be interesting to do in Morocco. Look deeper into patient treatment and survivorship, as a lot of this information was not available in the medical records. And then also further analysis by diagnosing hospital. So as my future career plans, I think this experience has definitely piqued my interest in cancer epidemiology, and I want to do international work of some kind. Not exactly sure, and perhaps a PhD program in the future. Perhaps after our speakers speak this afternoon, I'll have more ideas for this slide. And I wanted to acknowledge the U of M School, or Office of Global Public Health, for helping fund my internship, and also the UNMC and the CEESP program, and then everyone in our office that helped me with my project. That's it.
Good job. Questions, comments? I think Joe has a lot of work to be done going through the 3 sources of data and figuring out his final data set. But he could produce a lot of results also from the registry and the 4,000 cases of the registry. Questions? Bob?
Well, there's a certain advantage in working with IBC since there's no clinical pathology that identifies it for sure. In most studies, pathology trumps everything. In this case, there is no pathology. It's all based upon a clinical diagnosis of a physician looking at the patient and looking at these characteristics of the skin, the swelling, and so forth. It's very imprecise. But on the other hand, in the case of Casablanca, if there was a clinical pathology diagnosis, he would have to go around to all of the independent pathology laboratories in the city, because not all pathology is done at hospitals. So it's a unique characteristic in some cities, and Casablanca is one of those. So you're really lucky that you didn't have a disease that has a pathology marker. but it illustrates the difficulties that we've experienced in doing these studies in a variety of places in the world, is that the assumptions that you have are very different than when you get there.
And it shows in his data, some IBC cases are in the registry, not in the logbooks, not in our study. And others are in the study, not the logbooks, not the registry, which is going to be interesting.
And also cases coded T4B or C that end up being.
Yeah? Dr. O'Donnell.
You know, I remember having discussions a long time ago when we were in Egypt about maybe there's some insight into the etiology of this because there's more of it in this region of the world. Is there anything new going on about why it's higher there?
So our initial analysis from 220 triplets from the 3 countries showing variation between the countries but showing higher risk in diabetic patients. So diabetes increases the risk for IBC when compared with non-IBC breast cancers and controls. Still, the viral etiology theory is there, but it's difficult to prove.
And just to reassure you about the issues of missing data, I have a story that I tell students, and I had a fellow who was interested in doing a study of body mass index and the risk of high BMI at the MD Anderson Cancer Center. So we had very nice data sets. That's the largest cancer center in the country. And there was lots of missing data. And it was specifically on height. Well, you can't calculate BMI unless you have height and weight. Well, as it turns out, that surgeons didn't record height because they weren't calculating a chemo dose. They were just concerned that the patient fit on the surgical table. And they just didn't record height. So up until about 1990, when this fellow was attempting to do this work, half the patients had no height recorded in the data, which went back to 1941. So it was a huge issue, and it allowed my Department of Epidemiology to create a patient history database, which was a front door questionnaire, which was done on all new patients, and height was included. But it's this story about the missing height that convinced the physicians at MD Anderson to say yes to the Department of Epidemiology collecting these data. And of course we expanded it to include diet and a variety of things, smoking history and so forth. It's become a very rich data set. So just to reassure you, missing data is something that's part and parcel of doing epidemiology.
I want to add to what Dr. Chamberlain just mentioned about missing data. We published a paper in 2009-2010 about IBC comparison between Egyptian and US patients from University of Michigan. And we had a lot of missing data in the University of Michigan medical records. So it's not just foreign countries, it's even in the US and Michigan. Okay, thank you, Joe.